So I want to do a review of a new tinnitus book that just hit the market, and this is the Tinnitus book, Understanding Tinnitus and How to Find Relief by Dr. James Henry, one of the foremost experts on tinnitus in this country. You know, the last couple of books about tinnitus that I've reviewed in the newsletter have been about CBT and very specific treatments, strategies for tinnitus. This book is not a specific treatment strategy. It's an overview, really, of everything we know about tinnitus. I like to think of it along the lines of the old Dragnet TV show. And the character Jack Webb would always ask, "Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts." And that's really what this book is. It's just the facts about tinnitus. And I would say it's not everything you want to know about tinnitus, but it's really everything you need to know about tinnitus. If it's not in this book, you really don't need to know it. So I suspect this will be a real resource for things to come, and I'm going to get into it. And what I'm going to do is just go over some of the quotes that stood out for me from the book, the information, some of the informational stuff, some that I knew and some that I didn't know, and kind of comment on them. So as a way of giving you an idea for the sort of content you get here. Number one, the majority of people who experience tinnitus are not bothered by it. This is really kind of the theme of my work in mindfulness. And when I say it's not about the tinnitus, right? It's about how our body and our mind are responding to the tinnitus, because obviously it's not the tinnitus causing the problem, because most of the people who have the tinnitus aren't bothered, but people like myself and you, if you're watching this, are bothered by the tinnitus. So this really points us in the direction of a treatment strategy, and that is, as I said, how our body and our mind responds to the tinnitus. But it's just an interesting fact here. Almost half of the participants in a survey said their tinnitus fluctuates daily. Mine certainly does. Invariably, it's gentler in the morning most of the time, and louder in the evening and at night most of the time. So it's good to know where I fall in the curve. About half the folks. At his clinic where he worked, I gather he just retired, if I remember correctly. Half the patients reported that their tinnitus consisted of just one sound. The other half reported 2, 3, or even more sounds. And I, again, am in the latter category. Kind of a hissing sound, if I'm lucky, in the daytime, although right now it's a little more irritating, more pronounced than the usual morning hissing. Not sure why that is. And at night, it's the what I just call the million cricket chorus. In general, it is important for people with tinnitus to determine if anything causes their tinnitus to become louder. If so, such things should be avoided. Now, a couple of things. On the one hand, this sounds pretty obvious. It's like the old joke, "Doctor, it hurts when I do that." Well, don't do that. Right? On the other hand, I think we have to be careful about keeping in mind correlation is not causation. Right? Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one is the cause of the other. It just might be a coincidence. And we have to be very cognizant of that. Right? I might think coffee increases my tinnitus when maybe it's just my tinnitus gets louder when I'm up in the morning or at a certain time. So if again and again and again, and you do some experimentation, you don't do it and it doesn't get louder, then yeah. I mean, again, doctor, it hurts when I do that, don't do that. But I would just put the caution here, correlation is not causation. Outside of stress, there is a level of personalization. Some things work for other people. I've never really found anything outside of stress that's a trigger for my tinnitus, but other people swear by other things. And if it's not going to ruin your life, then there's no harm in avoiding things that you think cause your tinnitus to spike, and you may even be correct, but I would just put an asterisk on this claim. Correlation is not causation. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, as we say in Latin. After this, therefore, because of this is actually a fallacy. Right? So be alert, but be cautious. Number 5, tinnitus is not a disease. A disease is a condition that deteriorates the normal functioning of the cells, tissues, and organs. Tinnitus is a health condition, but it is not a disease in a contemporary sense. I think that's a good way of looking at it. I really don't have anything to add to that. People whose tinnitus was still bothersome after 6 months were more likely to require therapy for their tinnitus. That again, he's the expert, and that sounds about right. And if you're at that stage, what does that tell you? If it's been about 6 months, by therapy, among other things, is behavioral health therapy. And there's a lot of stuff out there in that realm that is really not pursued by folks with tinnitus. I did a survey at one point from people who had taken my class and other folks I could corral about the number of people who had seen a mental health therapist with tinnitus, and it was extremely small, less than 10%, I think. And the thing is, what the research tells us about the number of people with tinnitus who suffer from anxiety and depression is it's much higher than in the normal population, much above that, close to like a 30 to 50% level, I think, if I recall. So again, the 6 months barrier seems to be a important line to keep in mind for everybody. And the thing is, it's said here, this isn't just some schmo saying it. This is one of the topmost experts saying it, so we tend to take it a lot more seriously than just picking it up off the internet. It's impossible to predict how a person's tinnitus might change over time. That's just the fact of life, and we have to live with that uncertainty. I mean, it's impossible to predict that you're gonna make it through the day to day, right? All sorts of things happen. I remember, I think it was last summer, a woman was killed by a beach umbrella was picked up by the wind, carried up across the beach, and killed this woman. I mean, uncertainty abounds, and we manage it. And this is something that we can manage when it comes to our tinnitus, but it's just a fact. We don't know what's going to happen. The next statistic is a little hopeful. A large-scale study found that 18% of people who experienced tinnitus reported that it was not present 4 years later. Again, hopeful. I had nothing to add to it. It's generally believed that tinnitus is more bothersome once it is associated with a traumatic event. And I've written about trauma and tinnitus. I think it's one of the unmapped areas. People are beginning to look into what's called classic trauma associated with maybe trauma with a capital T, PTSD, but there's also something called complex trauma, which we know in regular psychological conditions is as big an issue as classic trauma, and which I think is also an area when it comes to tinnitus, that there are I've never known anyone that hasn't found their tinnitus to be a traumatic event. So I think we need to expand our definition of trauma here outside of if you got your tinnitus by some single event that you can pick out, like a loud noise blew your ear out or something like that. That may be a classic trauma, but again, very few people I know that I work with who have come to work with me because it's bothersome will say their tinnitus was not traumatic. So I just think we need to expand the notion of trauma here. Patients with an earlier onset of tinnitus suffer significantly less than patients with that onset later in life. Furthermore, patients with a later onset of tinnitus described their course of tinnitus distress as more abrupt and distressing right from the beginning. And again, this is from someone who's dealt with thousands of people and looked at all the research literature. So that's just a fact we have to deal with. If you get it later in life, it's more likely to cause you more problems. Numerous studies have shown that what tinnitus sounds like, its acoustic characteristics have little or no relation to how bothersome it is, nor how well people do with treatment. This kind of loops around to the first statement about what we're bothered by. Again, the sound, the pitch, the loudness does not impact the bother. Bother is separate from any acoustic characteristics that you can ascribe to your tinnitus, which leads us back to the notion that, well, it's not the tinnitus. It's not about the tinnitus. It's how our body is, in our mind, are responding. And as mindfulness tells us, that's something we can begin to take power over. So, something to keep in mind. Companies that claim their product and service can reduce the loudness of their tinnitus have no basis to make such a claim, which seems about the nicest way I know of calling someone a lying SOB that I've come across lately. Right? No basis to make such a claim. Nothing can reduce the loudness of your tinnitus, and that's just a fact. However, as I said, kind of these last couple of quotes, it's not about the tinnitus, it's about how our body and our mind responds to the tinnitus. Most people with tinnitus have constant tinnitus, meaning they can always hear it in a quieter room if they listen for it. Yeah, that's me as well. And if James Henry is right, that's most people with tinnitus. So know that you're not alone if that's you. One thing I want to point out, in the book he talks about this wonderful archive called the Tinnitus. It's tinnitusarchive.org, and I'll put this in the notes. You can go online and you find they have like a 10 or 15 years of surveys they did on hundreds of questions with hundreds of people, tinnitus clients, and so there's this vast resource of information about tinnitus from tinnitus clients that's kind of interesting to look at if you like looking at such things. It's just more of curiosity than anything else. Anyway, I highly recommend the book. It's likely to be become a classic. As I said, if you buy one book about tinnitus, this would be it. Everything you need to know about tinnitus is in this book. Anyone who gets it, the first thing I think to do is pick up this book to learn something, to learn what there is to learn about it, and stay off the internet. Doesn't mean you don't get further treatment, but you go to your audiologist, go to a therapist, a whole therapist, read this book, and that will pretty much do you. So again, highly recommend the Tinnitus book, Understanding Tinnitus and How to Find Relief by Dr. James Henry. Bye.